Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Look, if you're gearing up for the MCAT, you already know the sheer volume of information can feel, well, completely overwhelming. But today, we're going to embark on this epic, highly structured molecule-to-mind journey. We're taking the absolute highest yield concepts from top review sheets and distilling them into one beautifully connected biological story. Sound good? Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this multidisciplinary roadmap. We'll be hitting chemical structures and spectroscopy, enzymes as biological catalysts, the brain and nervous system, memory and classical conditioning, theories of emotion, and finally, psychological disorders.
So I want you to keep this overarching question in mind as we go. What exactly connects a vibrating molecule to complex human memory? It's a big question, right? But medical practice, and by extension the MCAT, doesn't really care about isolated facts. They require you to connect micro-level chemistry directly to macro-level human behavior. So let's start making those connections.
Section 1, Chemical Structures and Spectroscopy. We're starting right at the absolute foundation to understand how we actually analyze invisible molecular structures. Now, what's really interesting is how distinctly different molecular bonds reveal themselves when we just shoot infrared light at them. Notice the deep, sharp peak produced by a carbonyl group. Contrast that with an amine group, that NH bond, which gives us a sharp peak around the 3300 wave number mark, but with a much broader profile. Recognizing these specific peak shapes, that's instant points on test day, for sure.
And then we have the most famous peak of them all. Look at that distinctively wide U-shaped dip. That is your classic OH stretch. This beautifully cements the whole concept of infrared spectroscopy for us. It basically plots percent transmittance on the y-axis against wave number on the x-axis. So the molecular vibration, the stretching and bending of these specific bonds, is exactly what we're measuring.
Section 2, Enzyme as biological catalyst. Stepping up a level in biological scale, we move from individual chemical bonds to the actual protein machines that drive our reactions. But how do these enzymes actually grab onto their targets? Well, historically, scientists relied on the lock-and-key theory. That's the idea that the enzyme and its substrate are rigidly and exactly complementary. But modern biology leans heavily on the induced fit theory. This essentially tells us that enzymes aren't just rigid locks. Instead, they undergo dynamic, conformational changes to fully interact with the substrate. It's an active, shifting embrace. Think of it kind of like a highly specific, slightly awkward biological hug.
You really have to be aware of a classic MCAT trap here, though. Enzymes are biological catalysts, right? Yes, they absolutely change the rate of the reaction by altering the mechanism, and yes, they catalyze both forward and reverse reactions. But, and this is absolutely crucial, they do not alter the overall thermodynamics, meaning delta G or delta H remain totally unchanged, and they never alter the final equilibrium position. They just get you to that equilibrium much faster, often bringing in metal cofactors or organic coenzymes to help get the job done.
Section 3, Brain and Nervous System.
Let's see how this builds our next level of complexity, bridging the gap from localized, functional proteins to full systemic human anatomy. The autonomic nervous system is basically a masterclass in opposing forces. On one side, we have the sympathetic nervous system, your classic fight or flight response. It actively dilates your pupils, accelerates your heartbeat, and totally halts digestion. On the flip side, the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest state. It does the exact opposite, deliberately constricting the pupils, slowing down the heart rate, and stimulating digestion and bile release.
And what's driving all these massive systemic changes? Our neurotransmitters. Let's do a really quick rapid-fire review here. Acetylcholine handles voluntary muscle control and parasympathetic responses. Dopamine, that's crucial for smooth movements and postural stability. Serotonin is regulating your mood, eating, and dreaming. GABA provides brain stabilization, and endorphins, well, they act as our body's natural painkillers. Literally, every single behavior stems from this specific chemical cocktail.
And all of those neurotransmitters are firing within this incredibly complex anatomical web. You've got everything from the frontal lobe handling your executive function, all the way to the occipital lobe managing visual processing. Now, while you're memorizing these anatomical pathways, you definitely don't want to forget the electrical activity mapping over them. A truly great high-yield mnemonic for sequential brainwaves is BAT-T, beta, alpha, theta, delta. Section 4, Memory and Classical Conditioning.
Now we zoom out even further. How does this incredibly complex brain actually interact with the outside environment? Well, it all starts with how we encode and store time. Memory isn't just one big bucket you throw things into. It's a highly structured timeline. Sensory memory, for instance, lasts less than a second. Short-term or working memory holds on for less than a minute. But long-term memory, that can last a lifetime. And notice how long-term memory splits. We have explicit, conscious memory for facts and events, and implicit, unconscious memory for procedural skills and specific tasks.
But how do we actually learn new associations to put into that memory bank in the first place? Let's look at the classic Pavlovian model. We start purely with biology. Present a dog with meat, and the dog naturally salivates. The meat is an innate, unconditioned stimulus, and the drooling is an unconditioned response. There is absolutely no learning required here. It's just hardwired.
And this brilliantly illustrates the next step. We introduce a bell. Initially, this bell is a completely neutral stimulus. The dog hears it and feels absolutely nothing. Zero salivation. It's literally just a dog staring blankly at a bell.
But when we continuously pair that neutral bell with the unconditioned meat, the brain physically rewires itself. We achieve associative learning. That once neutral bell actually becomes a conditioned stimulus. Now, just ringing the bell alone triggers a brand new conditioned response, salivation. So from molecular neurotransmitters to learned behavioral responses, the chain remains totally unbroken.
Section 5. Theories of Emotion.
Building on that associative learning, we enter the highly complex, totally subjective world of human cognitive processing. So the crucial point here is understanding the exact sequence of how we feel. Look at how these three main theories split the timeline. James Lange says physiological arousal happens first, which then directly causes the emotion. Ken Bard argues that the arousal and the feeling of the emotion happens simultaneously, but entirely independently. But the bottom pathway introduces a crucial cognitive element.
Let's actually walk step by step through that bottom pathway, the Schachter-Singer two-factor theory. First, you see a snake, and that triggers arousal. Step 2 is where the magic really happens. Your heart is pounding, sure, but you also must consciously apply a cognitive label to the situation. You literally have to tell your brain, I'm scared. Only when the physical arousal and that cognitive label act together do you finally experience the resulting emotion of fear.
Section 6. Psychological disorders.
We've reached the climax of our molecule-to-mind arc. What happens when these foundational molecular systems fall out of clinical balance? The DSM-5 categorizes mental disorders by their symptoms, but the MCAT, it really wants you to know the underlying biological markers. Look at how perfectly this ties back to our earlier neurochemistry review. Schizophrenia is linked to genetics, birth trauma, and excess dopamine. Depression correlates with high glucocorticoids but low levels of norepinephrine, serotonin, and dopamine. Bipolar disorder swings the exact other way, links to high norepinephrine and serotonin. And Alzheimer's disease? Well, it's characterized by brain atrophy, senile plaques of beta amyloid, and crucially, a significant drop in acetylcholine.
Which brings us to our final pivotal thought. We started with the microscopic stretching of an OH bond on a spectroscopy graph and ended up mapping the molecular breakdown of human cognition in Alzheimer's disease. On test day, remember, you aren't just memorizing disconnected, random facts. You are learning one beautifully connected biological story. So, the next time you look at a flashcard, ask yourself, how does this connect the micro to the macro? Keep making those connections, and you'll absolutely crush this exam. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and happy studying.